Today we are going to talk about how to choose the research design of your study. There are many ways to approach the how to conduct a research study. However, before talking about that, it is necessary to know four concepts that illustrate the relationship between the how of a research study and the rest of it. Those concepts are philosophical paradigms, research paradigms, or methodologies, research designs, and research methods. You need to differentiate those concepts in order to be able to choose how to conduct your thesis or dissertation. First of all, let's see what is a paradigm. Generally speaking, it's a model or pattern of something that guides our action. In other words, is basically something that guides us, that shows us how to do something. So let's see one specific paradigm. What's a philosophical paradigm? And it is a basic image of what is reality, how we know something, and how we should find out knowledge. In other words, those three elements are in fact called ontology, epistemology, and methodology. So, how we conceive reality is called in philosophy ontology. How we know something is called in philosophy epistemology. And how we find out knowledge is called methodology. The way we conceive reality determines how we view knowledge, our role in relation to it, and what action we should use to get it. That's why we are talking about this in today's webinar. We need to know that all our approach to research things depends on how we see and conceive life, reality, how we know about it. In other words, it depends on our philosophy about those things. Well, let's now that we have talked about philosophical paradigms, let's talk about research paradigms, and which is the second element of this graph, in which we go from general to specific level. Okay? So, what's a research paradigm? Well, Weber and Olson says that it's a pattern of beliefs and practices that regulates inquiry within a discipline by providing lenses, frames, and processes through which investigation is accomplished. As you can see, a research paradigm is basically a set of, not rules, but a set of ways of looking at reality, and in that sense, ways of approaching to its research. Okay? That's why Weber and also talk about lenses. Imagine it's a lens through which you can look at reality, or it's a frame within it you can know how to approach reality, and also talks about the processes. In other words, this is what it is also called methodology. So you can call it research paradigm, or you can also call it methodology. And it's important that when we talk about methodology, we are really talking about something it is not a specific thing. It doesn't refer to small things, to details. It refers to something bigger. Methodology is something bigger. It is a pattern of belief and practices that we use to investigate things. It establishes the framework into which our view of the research process is inserted. In other words, it gives us the elements to conceive and interpret the research process. Welcome to all the people that is today listen to this presentation. We can say there are several research paradigms. However, it is also possible to group them to a certain extent, really, into two big research paradigms. And they are these two. Let's see. From the philosophical point of view, the philosophical paradigm, we can talk about positivist paradigm. What characterizes that paradigm? That there is one objective reality. So from the philosophical point of view, if we are positivists, we see and we think that there is just one objective reality. So if we want to research that reality, we have to follow a process, a method that let us catch all the characteristics of that reality in a very objective way. No interpretations are allowed. So this is what we call the quantitative research paradigm. But there is another philosophical paradigm, another way of looking at reality, which is called interpretive paradigm. And what it says, well, there are many truths and multiple realities. This is quite different from the first one. Just one here for the positivist, more for the interpretive. So that means that you can understand reality and you can investigate reality using different ways and not being absolutely objective in that way. That is what is called the qualitative research paradigm. So when see this, since your philosophical paradigm determines your views and interest, because as we have said, the way that you conceive reality gives you the lenses in order to understand things. So if to a certain extent, the way that you conceive reality determines your view and your interest, what you are interested in. So we can approach the same distinction that we have already seen. We can approach it basing and using your research interest to illustrate it. Let's see it, the same distinction in a less philosophical way. If you are interested in testing a theory to support or refute it, or you are interested in testing specific variables that form hypotheses, then you will be into the quantitative research paradigm. If you want to test a theory to support or refute it, or if you want to test specific variables, you are into the quantitative research paradigm, and it means that you conceive reality in an objective way. Okay? However, if you are interested in understanding what meaning individuals assign to a phenomenon, you are interested in individuals' opinions, individuals' perception of reality or a phenomenon, or if you are interested in understanding the complexity of a single idea or phenomenon, then you will be into the qualitative research paradigm. So let's go back again to the four main concepts that we are talking about today. And once that we know what research paradigms or methodology is, then it's time to talk about research designs in this relationship that go from general to specific. So what's a research design? Versman and George says a plan or a strategy for conducting a research study. Look at this, a plan or strategy. So it's something big, okay? But it's focused on how doing something, or how conducting the research study. In that sense, it comprises all the elements related to the how to develop the study in a coherent and logical way in order to address the research problem effectively and also achieve the established purpose. We can say that it's a kind of the blueprint to gather and analyze data, including the selection of population sample instrument procedure. Is the blueprint, and this is what we focus on when we say how to conduct your study. Is a blueprint that tells us, okay, who will participate, what data is needed, how data will be gathered, how data will be analyzed. So this blueprint, you can also call it the user guide of your thesis or dissertation. And why? Because it tells everybody how you did your dissertation, and it tells other people how they can replicate your study. So that's the user guide. It's like those small booklets that are inserted, are included when we buy a new things, and by the way, that we never read it. But in this case, it is a good idea to read the user guide of dissertations or research studies, so you can know exactly how people conducted their studies. And that will give you a lot of ideas of how to do your own study. Okay, so what types, now we are going to talk about types of research designs. According to the research paradigm or methodology into which a study can be inserted, research design can be also quantitative. Remember that we talk about that there is a quantitative research design or methodology, a qualitative one. So we have the same two things together, but we also have a third option, is the mixed method research design. And it is used when you are interested in complex phenomena that need a comprehensive approach to be fully understood. So this is let's say that this is the most recent research design that has emerged as an answer to study problems that needs more interpretation, that needs more needs to deepen their knowledge of the problem. And mixed method research design gives us the opportunity to do that. Okay, so when we talk about the quantitative research design, there are certain characteristics that should be that emerge when we talk about that. The first one is that a quantitative research design is basically deductive. In other words, goes top-down logic. It goes from general to specific. And that design also looks for relationships, facts, and causes. It is theory-based because when you applied it, you are trying usually to test a theory or to test one of its principles or to test a model that is based on that theory. So it is theory-based. It is also focused on individual variables. So the phenomenon is studied and the variables, in other words, the elements that are important for that phenomenon are identified, and then the study is based on those individuals' variables. It is context-free because it wants to get generalizations. The more generalizations you can derive from a quantitative study, the better is that study. And the researcher has a neutral role. Why? Because the philosophy behind this research design says that there is one objective reality. Therefore, the research has to be objective. And it is based on a statistical analysis. Okay, let's see what happened with the quality research design. It is inductive. In other words, it goes down top. It has a down top logic. It goes from specific to general. It also is focused or tries to understand social phenomena. So people and their beliefs, values, opinions, and acts are the main concern of qualitative research design. They try usually to find out an emergent theory. So theory is not tested. Theory is identified. Theory emerges from the study. It has a holistic view because it tries to understand the phenomenon in a comprehensive way, in a complete way. It is context specific. So generalizations are not the goal of qualitative research design. All findings refer to the context that was studied. In this case, since the philosophy behind it says that there are multiple realities, then researcher is allowed to be not only an observer, but also a participant sometimes, something that is not allowed in the quantitative research design. And the analysis is not statistical, but is based on narratives. Okay, so it's narrative analysis. What people produce, the texts that can be produced by people are analyzed. When we talk about the mixed method research design, we're talking about a comprehensive paradigm. It is deductive and inductive at the same time because they have quantitative and qualitative stages. So both types of logic are present in a mixed method research design. It looks for a deep understanding of the problem. So during many years, researchers wonder about, okay, I'm studying this phenomenon using only quantitative design, and I feel that I need something else. I need to, if I can look for people's opinions, then I can have a better understanding of the problem. Or the other way around, that people were looking for opinions, but they feel that their need a more objective way of looking or getting some data. That's why mixed method research design was created. In it, the researcher is free to use all methods needed. So the researcher is not constrained by what that person can use. No, any method that is needed can be used. And it fosters collaboration among researchers. And this is a very interesting way. Of course, when you are doing a thesis or a dissertation, you are not allowed to make groups, but when you are doing report study for other things, you are allowed to. And even when you are doing your dissertation, you can use something that has been developed by another researcher. Of course, you have to acknowledge that, but it means that you can collaborate. For instance, if your background is quantitative, you can collaborate with a qualitative researcher and the other way around. So, but it's not, I mean, all the things are nice, all of things are positive, all things are attractive, but you have to take into account that using mixed method research design takes time, resources to collect and analyze data. So it's not, oh, how easy is this? It's not easy. It is probably is the best option for some problems, but you have to be ready to deal with two different philosophical paradigms and try to find out to accomplish them into one unit. Okay? So now you say, okay, I know philosophical positions, basis of all this. I know what a research design is, but how can I choose the best research design for my study? Let's see some factors that you need to take into account. This was adapted from Punch work. At the end of this presentation, you will have all the references. Okay, so let's look at each one of those factors that you have to take into account in order to decide, okay, I'm going to use this research design. Of course, the first thing is the research question. What do you want to answer? What do you want to know? What do you want to test? And this is the first factor to take into account, because what you need or what you want to answer determines to a certain extent what kind of research design you need. If you are interested, if your research question is focused on testing things, is focused to knowing how effective something is, then that means that you need a quantitative research design. However, if you are interested in knowing and exploring things in order to know all the things, in order to be able to make another study, or if you are interested in determining and knowing how people think or conceive things, so you are talking about a qualitative one. And sometimes you have more than one research question, and therefore you need more than one research design. In that case, it means that you need to use a mixed method research design. The second factor to take into account is the purpose of the research. What do you want to achieve? Do you want to solve a problem? Do you want to understand it better? Probably if you want to solve a problem, the first option is a quantitative research design. And if you want to understand something better, the opposite, but it's not always the same. I mean, that depends on the research question. It is also important to take into account previous research studies, how other researchers have dealt with similar problems and questions, how they approached this similar research study. And if you look at that, you can say, okay, I'm going to use this same research design, or perhaps the opposite. You say, okay, this phenomenon has been studied always using this type of research design, and I think that there is a gap, that if I change the research design and focused on this other element of the same reality, I can produce something that will be useful. Okay? But you also need to take into account the demands of the study. You need to think about time and resources required, access to participants, access to information, possibilities to gather data. If the research design that you are interested in using has a lot of demands for your work, and you are especially writing, you are going to produce a thesis or a dissertation, you need to take this factor into account because you have established time to do this. So you have a specific amount of time to finish your thesis and dissertation, and you should not use more time, more efforts, more resources that are needed. And once you get your degree, you can think about or you can omit this factor, but not for when you are doing your thesis or dissertation. It is also important to take into account the impact of the research design. What research design will produce more useful knowledge? Because the more useful knowledge of your of the findings of your dissertation will be, the more important impact you will have, and you are interested in selling your findings. So it is important to also do this, and it's related to what I said before, that you say, okay, when we talk about previous research study, you say, okay, this phenomenon has always been studied using this research design. If I change that and find out a different way of doing this, I will get more useful information to complete what is already known. And finally, you should take into account your own philosophical paradigm. What paradigm are you more identifying with? Your views and beliefs will be needed to make decisions. Therefore, you will need to feel comfortable with the framework with which you will do it. However, this factor should be considered before choosing the research design when you look for problems to study. In other words, if you are interested in knowing people's view of things and so on, then you have to choose a problem that needs to be studied using a qualitative research design. If you are interested in testing something, in knowing if something is better, is more effective than another thing, then you have to choose a problem that needs to be studied from the quantitative point of view. What is not advisable, what is not the best option, is to find to decide or identify a problem and then force the research design to your philosophical paradigm with a problem and a research question that needs a different research design. So if you feel comfortable and if you want to work with a specific research design, take that into account when you identify your problem, when you select also your research problem, before getting to the research design selection stage. Because if you do not do that, if you don't do that, you can try to force a research design in a problem and in a research question that is different and that requires a different research design. Okay. So let's go to the last concept that we have identified for this webinar, which is research methods. So this is the more specific concept. What's a research method? Look, it's a set of techniques or strategies to gather and analyze data. So the research design is the blueprint, is the user guide. It comprises all the things that you have to do in order to get data, analyze data, and get findings out of it. But the research method is the technique, is the strategy that you use to gather and analyze data. It's one part of the blueprint, is one part of the whole thing. So let's see examples of quantitative research methods. Well, for instance, the most known or the best known quantitative research method is the experimental one, in which at least one variable is controlled and manipulated by the researcher in order to test cause-effect relationship. And it is there is one important point when we talk about experimental research method, that is the subjects are assigned at random and that's its main characteristic. But there is another well-known research method, which is quasi-experimental. It is nearly the same like the experimental one, except for the fact that subjects cannot be assigned at random, and the researcher has to work with intact group. It is very common in education, for instance. If you want to test the effectiveness of teaching strategy, teaching method, or so on, and it is usual. It is a very common fact that you cannot assign subjects at random, that you have to work with groups of students, classes that are already formed. So that is called a quasi-experimental research method. But also another one is the ex post facto. An ex post facto research method is a non-experimental method in which variables are studied in retrospect. In other words, things have happened and you studied that. And for instance, there are two basic ways of doing ex post facto research. One is correlational, when you try to find out if two variables are related, not necessarily in a cause-effect relationship, not only that they are related. For instance, if gender is related to a specific performance in a specific subject, for instance. And it is also true, it is also ex post facto when you go causal comparative. In other words, you compare things and you see if those variables that you are comparing in any way are related to a cause of something. That's ex post facto, because you do not do an experiment. You work with things that have already happened. And another example is survey. This method is characterized by the points at which data is gathered. For instance, 2 or more data collection time, this is longitudinal. So when you want to know how something has evolved in time, and you take that gathered data in two or more occasions, two or more times, there's a survey longitudinal. And there is also the cross-section. That cross-sectional refers to the nature of the sample. Random samples from all population at one time, one point in time. So here you have the same population in different times, at different points of time, and here you have the whole population divided into groups, and the data is gathered just once. Those are examples of quantitative research method. Of course, this is not exhaustive. There are many other ways, but these are just to let you know what you do, so you can have an idea of what you can use. Now let's see examples of qualitative research methods. Phenomenology is when you want to describe experiences as they are lived, when you want to describe what people live. And grounded theory is when you want to develop a theory that is related to what people think or do. So you do not approach to the phenomenon with a previous theory, but you try to look for what is the theory that is behind the way people act. Ethnography refers to when you want to describe a culture characteristic, the characteristic of a culture. And in that sense, you use ethnography study. Historical is when you want to describe and examine events of the past to understand the present and anticipate potential future effects. So your study is trying to look deeply into events of the past to understand what is happening now and anticipate how those things may happen in the future. And case study is when you want to describe in depth the experience of one person or family or group or community or institution. So you select one unit, person, family, group, community, institution, everything, and then you want to describe the experience of that unit in a deep way. Once again, it's not an exhaustive list of examples, but it's a basic list so you can have idea of what is going on. Now, mixed method research, we will be discuss that next Saturday. We will focus the whole webinar talking about how to conduct a mixed method research study. Now let's practice. Look at this. I'm going to give you these elements of the research. A problem. A teacher has 3 different classes of first-year calculus in which students are performing below the expected level. That's the problem. Your purpose is to determine the effects of different types of feedback on a student's performance. The research question is, what is the effect of different types of feedback over the performance of first-year calculus students? And the values of the independent variable are positive feedback, negative feedback, or no feedback. Can you establish the research design and a possible research method for this? Okay, if you look at this, the research design could be quantitative. However, it is also possible to use a mixed method research design, focus on a quantitative stage and using a qualitative stage to deepen the results of the first stage, by means of gathering students' opinion about the role of treatment. And the research method could be a quasi-experimental method due to the fact that the students are not assigned to the groups at random. Okay, let's see another example to practice. Elements of the research. Now the problem is the use of social networks by European children increases every year, and the role in the children's relationships needs to be studied. The purpose is to know what characterizes the relationship between European children and social networks. And the research question is, how do European children use social networks? So can you establish the research design and the research method? Okay, so the research design should be qualitative, and the research method could be ethnography, because you are trying to describe the characteristic of a culture, in this case, the European children culture. In the same way, you can do this exercise with your own study and establish what the problem is, the research question, the research design, the research method, and do the same. Identify the research design and the research method. Now you know what research paradigm, research design are, factors to select research design, and what research method is. Do you have any question or comment? Please feel free to express it here or express it at the bulletin. Okay, so these are the references that we have used today: Punch, Weaver and Olson, and Versman and Europe. And finally, these are the upcoming news events in a doctoral net, and we continue with the accelerated program, the scholarship program, and the writing group. The next conference is tomorrow: how to make your literature match your methodology and your study. Next Saturday, how to design a mixed method research study, then how to present your findings, and how to discuss your findings. The last one in May will be how to present your findings, and the first in June, how to discuss your findings. Thank you very much for coming today and to listen or watch this presentation.